It came to pass when all the people were clean passed over Jordan that the Lord spake unto Joshua, saying, Take you 12 men out of the people, out of every tribe of man, and commanded them, saying, Take you hence out of the midst of Jordan, out of the place where the priest's feet stood firm, 12 stones. And you shall carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place where you shall lodge this night. And Joshua called the 12 men whom he had prepared to the children of Israel out of every tribe of man. And Joshua said unto them, Pass over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan. Take you up every man of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that it may be a sign among you when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What mean ye by these stones? Then ye shall answer them that the waters of Jordan were cut off from before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over Jordan, the waters of Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial unto you and to the children of Israel forever. And the children of Israel did so as Joshua commanded, and took up the 12 stones. And so they pick up the stones. This chapter is about the memorial. This whole chapter is about the stones that are going to be set up on the land and the stones that are set up in the middle of the river. And so let's jump to verse 19. He's giving them commands on how to do it and what to do, except for verse 13 and 14, very important. We'll read some of these as we come to them. It says, About 40,000 prepared for war passed over before the Lord unto battle to the plains of Jericho. On that day the Lord magnified Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they feared Moses all the days of his life. So two things here is, first, right after the guy takes the rocks out, 40,000 soldiers poured over first. And we'll explain that in a moment. And then God said, Today I'm going to magnify you. Just like if you took a magnifying glass and increased the size of something. That's what he's doing, God's doing in the sight of Israel for Joshua. I mean, how would you like to fill Moses' sandals? I mean, that's big sandals to fill. Well, God says today, they're going to end up fearing you just like they feared Moses. You watch and see. And so God did the couple things. Now, verse 19, it says, And the people came up out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. And we'll talk about that. And encamped in Gilgal, on the east border of Jericho, and those 12 stones which they took out of Jordan did Joshua pitch in Gilgal. In other words, he set them up. And he spake unto the children of Israel, saying, When your children shall ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What mean these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel came over this Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of Jordan from before you until you were passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up from before us until we were gone over, that all the people of the earth might know the hand of the Lord that is mighty, and that you might fear the Lord your God forever. So we're in Joshua chapter 4. The title of this chapter this week is simply History for Survival. A nation has to teach its history. They have to be able to teach their history. If they don't, they're doomed as a nation. And by the way, it's written up in the Communist Manifesto of Karl Marx and Engels. It is written up in Something for Radicals, which Barack Obama called his favorite book by Zelensky on how to destroy a nation, how to take over a nation, Saul Alinsky. And it's written up in there too that you have to stop history from being taught to the kids. Or you have to teach a skewed version of that history. Like I told you last week, Hawaii took history out of the public school curriculum decades ago. They stopped teaching the kids history. It's not even a class. And geography. My grandson graduated from Hillcrest. He couldn't believe it. He when he was in his junior year, the teacher had a big map of the USA, a blank map up on the wall here at Hillcrest High School, and said, will somebody show us on the map where Oregon is? And so my grandson raised his hand, he got up, walked up to the map, and put his finger on the state that's right underneath Washington State on the west coast. And the teacher said, no, that's not right. And Isaac standing there and he went, huh? And she said, that's not right. And the teacher turned to the class and said, how many of you think that he's right? And none of them would raise their hand, all too scared. Isaac said, that's Oregon. He said, what's wrong with you? And then he gets in trouble, okay? Because and he's going, he came home, he said, Grandpa, how do they let people like that even teach? You know, but that's where we're at, folks. And so we have a nation that has stopped teaching its history and the greatness of America. And there's never been a greater nation as far as freedoms go in this world. I mean, none of the empires of the past were ever like this. Egypt, Assyria, Persia, the Greeks, the Romans, the Holy Roman Empire, none of them allowed freedom like this country does. But anyway, that's another issue. But that's the title of chapter 4. We have to rehearse the past in order to preserve our future. So here's where we're looking at the Jordan Rift Valley right now. The reason they call it a rift is because where the Jordan River is actually just a big crack. This thing could continue ripping from the Gulf of Aqaba all the way up to Syria. It's like where California is and the San Andreas Fault. I mean, it could just continue to rip in half. And so it's called the Jordan Rift Valley. And that's where Jericho is. Now, this is the old camp where Israel was prior to the crossing of the Jordan. Then they're going to cross over. Now they're going to set up new camp. And it's going to be in what's called the Plains of Jericho. The Plains of Jericho today are still considered to be to the south of Jericho. To the south and just to the east of Jericho. And they have found a village up north of Jericho on the north side where they say that's where the Israelis crossed. But it's just silly. It doesn't fit the picture here. You understand what I'm saying? It just doesn't fit. And so, can I tell you something? Gilgal wasn't a village at the time. Gilgal is just an open plain. That's all that means. It's just an open plain. And so they crossed over to this place that they're calling Gilgal. So when they crossed over, let's look at verses 10 and 11. Let me have somebody read verses 10 and 11 and someone else reading verse 19. Who's got 10 and 11? Yeah. All right, Phil, you have 10 and 11. Who has 19? 19, right here. Stephen.
For the priests which bear the ark stood in the midst of Jordan until everything was finished, that the Lord commanded Joshua to speak unto the people, according to all that Moses commanded Joshua. And the people hastened and passed over. And it came to pass, when all the people were clean passed over, that the ark of the Lord passed over, and the priests in the presence of the people.
All right, now verse number 19.
And the people came up out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and encamped in Gilgal, in the east border of Jericho.
Okay. So, the crossing date was 10 Nisan. It's pronounced Nisan. I keep wanting to say Nissan like the car, but it's Nisan in 1399 BC. So roughly almost 1400 BC is when this took place. Okay? And so the first thing that took place in the crossing was the ark carried by the priests walked, and as soon as their feet hit the brink of the waters parted. The waters below them continued on to the Dead Sea and dried out. The land dried, and the waters that were above stood up on a heap. They just stopped coming down. And so they just stood there. And then the priests were on dry ground, and they were told to go out to the middle of the river and just stand there. That's the only job they had, was to just stand in place, as if God had his hands holding the waters back. Okay, then the next thing was the water stopped coming down. And I mean, they just stopped like a dam was holding them back. They just stopped right there. Had to be something to see. And you know they're continuing to build up. They're coming down from the north. And so they're going to build up and probably get a little wider and then get a little higher. And it had to be something awesome to see. And then the next thing was the army had to go across. Now when the army crossed, they were told to fan out on the plains of Gilgal 40,000 soldiers. We're even told that these soldiers were of the 3 tribes that had already conquered their lands, on the east side of the Jordan River, and so they had to go over. That was Reuben and Gad and half tribe of Manasseh. Manasseh grew to be the largest of all the tribes. That's why it was split into two pieces. It was very huge, and so the half tribe, they sent the soldiers over first. They didn't have to do hardly any fighting for their land. God drove out the Gileadites with bees. Would bees drive you out of their house? Yeah, it wouldn't take long to drive me out of my house. Okay? I'd either kill them or they'd be killing me, or one or the other. And so they had to go over, and that formed then what is known in the military parlance a perimeter. They were told to go out, fan out, and form a perimeter where the rest of the children of Israel could come over in the safety of that circle. And it was probably a very large circle. So you got 40,000 soldiers pouring over, armed to the teeth, bows and arrows, spears, swords, helmets, armor, and they poured over because they have no idea what the Canaanites are going to do. And it's better safe than sorry. It's good to be prepared. And so they poured over there. Then the children of Israel crossed. But before the children of Israel crossed, then came the stone lifters. And so these guys came. First thing they did was gather up 12, take them over to the west side of the river. Then they were told to come back, pick up 12 more, and stack them in the base of the river, so that they would stand up nice and tall. Once the river flowed back, there they're going to stand right in the middle of the river. And so these two memorials will match each other. There's going to be one out in the middle of the river, and then there's one on the land. So the children are going to say, what does this got? What does it stand for? A memorial. You're creating a memorial, just like the Lincoln Memorial, Jefferson Memorial, the Iwo Jima Memorial. That is the first thing you see when you go into the Arlington National Cemetery. These are more, well, what meaneth these stones? What meaneth this memorial? And so they have a meaning. That's what a memorial is. Now it says that it took place in the month Nisan. Okay, so that's in verse number 19. Let's rehearse that one more time. It says, and the people came up out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. And so that's the 10th day of the first month. And the first month was named Abib. Now, I thought it was Nisan. I mean, isn't that what we're showing on that calendar? Nisan, Ayar, Sidan, Tammuz, Ab, Elul. Isn't it Nisan? Well, here's where you have to learn something. On our calendar, that would equal about the 25th of March, give or take a day. It's the 25th of March. So that's when they're crossing. It's springtime. Spring rains. How much rain have we had lately, huh? Spring rains, flood waters. I mean, this is the rough time of year to be trying to cross the Jordan. Now, it's called Nisan today, but it wasn't until the captivity. Okay? It wasn't called Nisan when they came out of Egypt. Okay? So let me show you some give you some historical background on calendars. Okay? For instance, over time, there have been many adjustments and changes in the calendars that even we live by. For instance, the Roman calendar was used from 304 BC until Julius Caesar, until 46 BC. Called the Roman calendar. That's why there was only 10 months. There were only 10 months. That's why Sept means 7, Oct means 8, Novus means 9, Deca means 10. There was only 10 months. And then later the Romans voted, after Caesar was assassinated and his son Gaius Octavius took over, and the Senate named him or honored him with the title Caesar Augustus. They added 2 more months. They named July after Julius Caesar and August after Augustus Caesar. And so they inserted 2, and now we have 12. And so that calendar changed, and it's called the Julian calendar, named after Julius Caesar, and it goes from the life of Caesar, 46 BC, until 1582 AD. So that thing for almost 1,600 years, the Julian calendar was used. And in 1582, we used what's known as the Gregorian calendar. That's how they find out that there's almost a 5-year error between those 2 calendars. That's why we now know that Jesus Christ, it sounds odd, but Jesus Christ was born in the year 5 BC. Now that sounds odd to say that. Christ was born 5 years before Christ. Okay? But there's a 5-year error, almost a 5-year error. And the reason we know that is, you remember Herod, who tried to kill the babies, tried to get Jesus? We know what day he died on. On our calendar, he died on April the 1st, 4 BC. Which means he had tried to kill the babies, and that Jesus would have fled to Egypt sometime in 5 BC. And so he slaughtered the babies, and then God killed him on April the 1st, on our calendar 4 BC. So the Hebrew calendar also changed. It was the same calendar from the days of Moses all the way till Daniel. From Moses to Daniel, it was the same calendar. And the first month, right there, if you notice over here on the left, is Abib. Abib. Turn to Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12. All right, let me have a reader for verses 1 and 2. Exodus 12, verses 1 and 2. Who's my reader for that? All right, Leslie, will you? Chapter 12, verses 1 and 2.
And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you.
Okay, so the day they came out Passover, God said, this is your first month. Okay, well, let's turn now to Exodus chapter 13, and let me have a reader for verses 3 and 4. Who's my reader for 3 and 4? Jess? Okay, verses 3 and 4 of chapter 13.
And Moses said unto the people, Remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand the Lord brought you out from this place. There's no leavened bread we eat. This day came ye out in the month of Abib.
So, what's the name of the first month according to that? Abib, not Nisan. Abib. And so here's what we know. Let me just share with you a long story short. Here's what we know. Okay? Only 4 of the original months are mentioned in the Bible. Abib, Ziv, Ethanim, and Bul. Those are the only 4. The other names you see there, Yerach. Yerach is the Hebrew word for month. Okay? And then after that, Shalosh, Arba, Kamesh, these are numbers. So it's month 3, month 4, month 5, month 6, and so on. And so the only 4 months of the original calendar of Moses to Daniel that are mentioned in the Bible are Abib, Ziv, Ethanim, and Bul. That's it. When they went into captivity, everything changed. Now the calendar that they use to this day is right there in the center, with Nisan being the first. Now why did they do it? We won't get into it. It's a long story. We won't get into why they did it. Then they were told, take you 12 men out of the people of every tribe, a man, in verse 12. And so they told them, first, pick up the stones, move them to the land. Pick up 12, move them to the land, then come back. Come back to the riverbed, and now set them up in the water. So, why did they set them up in the water? Well, a stone, the reason they gathered up these stones was one stone represented each tribe of Israel. So, I mean, the pride of their own tribe, it's out of each. They took a man from her. So the pride of their tribe, okay, I want the best rock. You know, I want my rock to be better than Benjamin's rock. Okay? And so I don't know how they acted or how they behaved, but they all grabbed a rock, carried it over to the side. Then they came back, picked up another big rock, and these, they worked for a little while, took some time, probably 30 minutes or so, to set these rocks up and stack them. They may have even had 2 guys to pick them up and set them on top. They'd stack them up like that. And so they set them up in the water. They set them in the riverbed and on the west side of Jordan. So there's a stack in the middle and a stack over on the west side. And then we also learned, so the younger generations of Israelites could learn from these memorial stones. If they ask, what does this stand for? They can be told. That's important. So first, let me share a reminder with you. If you've been in my class for any length of time, you know that when I taught on the Exodus, and we talked about the Exodus, that's the crossing side of the Exodus right there. Okay? Right where that square is, that's where they cross. They cross the section of the Red Sea that's known as the Gulf of Aqaba. That's almost a settled fact today because of the things that have been found on the floor of the seabed in Aqaba. And I'll show you one of the things they have found there. They've also found other things, but one of the things they found I'll show you in a second. So let's enlarge that. This is what it looks like, the Gulf of Aqaba. And the giant beach that they came out of that crack in the mountains onto is today named Nuweiba. In the time of Moses, it was named Pi-hahiroth. That was the name of that beach, Pi-hahiroth. Today, the Egyptians have renamed it Nuweiba Beach. And they crossed on a land bridge from Nuweiba to the country we today call over here Saudi Arabia. This is Arabia over here, and Mount Sinai is off the right-hand side of the stream. 2 columns that were set up by Solomon in the years of Solomon. This is the one, what the one looked like in Saudi Arabia that they found. The Arabians, the Arabs, have taken it down, and buried it in the sand. They don't want anyone to even see it or remember that this site was where they crossed. So the Arabs have taken this column down and buried it. But on the west side, in Sinai Peninsula, this one still stands. This one was also set up by Solomon. And again, it is to remember, they're just like the stones taken out of the river, to remember the spot where they crossed. And so they're memorial stones. And then it says in verses 12 and 13, you need to send men over prepared for war. Let's look at verses 12 and 13 again. And the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh, the 3 who already conquered their tribal lands on the east side of Jordan, passed over armed before the children of Israel, as Moses spake unto them. So this is probably the last executed order of Moses. Because Moses warned them, don't sit on your hind end and think, we got our land now, y'all go get yours. It's not my responsibility. No, no, no. Moses said, if you do that, God will put a pox on your house. He'll curse you. You need to go fight for your brethren until they have rest for their lands. Then you can come back home. So I don't know. They were following orders, but they may have volunteered for this. These 2 tribes may have said, we'll go. We're ready. We want to help our brothers and sisters to get their lands too. So they crossed over. Now this is probably what their swords look like, or a large number of their swords, the vast number, because they came out of Egypt. Remember, when they came out of Egypt, they were armed to the teeth, okay? This is an Egyptian sword. It's called a kophesh. And the Egyptians have used this sword. They used this sword for over 1,000 years. The Egyptian, if you ever watch the movie The Mummy, okay, and he falls down and these 4 creatures that have been brought back to life come, they're carrying a kophesh. And they stop just at a command, just as the point touches his face. And if you look closely at those swords they've got right holding to his face, it's one of those. It's a kophesh. And they came in lots of different sizes. They found one in the Gulf of Aqaba where the Jews crossed. And it's on display in the museum. This is the remains of an ancient Egyptian battle sword found in the Gulf of Aqaba at Nuweiba crossing site that dated to the Middle Kingdom. In other words, the time that Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt. So we do know that Nuweiba Beach was where they were at. Now let's talk a little bit about wisdom. What exactly is wisdom? I mean, the Bible says we should want it, amen? It's a good quality. It says the beginning. If it says that it's the beginning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The Bible says we should want to be wise. And then Solomon prayed, and he's the wisest guy in the whole world. And he wrote the book of Proverbs, and then he married 700 women. Wow, what happened, man? You fell off the turnip truck or something. I don't know what happened, but anyway. So, listen, what is wisdom? Well, I liken it to the headlights of your car when you're driving at night. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just have our brights on in deer country? That would help, amen, a little bit. Well, why do we like our brights? Because we can see farther. And that's what wisdom is. Wisdom allows someone to see farther into the future, to perceive what is coming, and to prepare themselves. Better prepare themselves for what's coming. So next time you turn your headlights on at night, remember, that's a perfect illustration of what wisdom means. And the older we get, the more of it we have. Okay? And You know, the Bible says hoary head is a crown of glory for old men, and strength is because the first thing a young man wants to do is go to war. You know, war's glorious, and the older guys are saying, no, it's not glorious, okay? Just wisdom. Their headlights can see just a little bit farther. Okay, now look at Joshua 4:13. Let me have a reader for 4:13 once again, okay? Who's my reader for that little verse right here? All right, well, Barb, you take this one, 4:13.
About 40,000 prepared for war, passed over before the Lord unto battle to the plains of Jericho.
So they had their spears and their shields and their glistening armor and their kofish, and they crossed over. Had to be a scary force. I don't know if the Canaanites were planning anything, but that would be a discourager, wouldn't it? If the first ones coming over were the guys who were armed to the teeth and ready for battle. And so that would be a clear discouragement. Now, why were they told to prepare for war? Well, once the waters closed, they are literally trapped now with the waters at their back. Flood stage waters at their back. Listen, I'm a buff of history, and I know how many times in history an army has had a river at their back. And it has changed things. When Alexander the Great met the army of Persia, Daniel chapter number 8, he crossed over the river, and there he was. He had the river at his back, and he's the one that rode back and forth in front of his troops. 50,000 Greeks facing 240,000 Persians. And he's the one that rode back and forth in front of his Greek army and said, today is a good day to die. So let's live for honor. And he charged, and he actually won the battle. What are the chances that 50,000 men could defeat an army of 240,000? But he did it because God said he was going to do it. But he got trapped. I mean, the river was at his back, so it's fight or else, or you're doomed. And so many times that's happened in history. Well, let's take a look at this verse. Go to Isaiah chapter 50. And I want someone who will read verses. I got to turn this way because that paper is blocking my view. Verses 7 and 8, Isaiah 50. And I want someone that will read verses 7 and 8, Isaiah 50. 7 and 8, okay? Go right ahead, Kay.
For the Lord God will help me, therefore shall I not be confounded. Therefore have I set my face like a flint, and I know that I shall not be ashamed. He is near that justifieth me. Who will contend with me? Let us stand together. Who is mine adversary? Let him come near to me.
It's kind of like I dare you. Go ahead. Knock it off. I dare you. That's literally what the Jews were doing. They were just daring Canaanites. Try something if you want to. And so there's no turning back. Once they cross the river, that's the point. There's no turning back. It's like when Cortez landed in the New World, he pushed all of his boats offshore and set fire to them. We're here, guys. That's it. And so we ain't going nowhere. This is it. So, listen, the river is crossed, which signifies a point of no return. Now, 1,350 years later, this act would take on a name because of another particular act that took place. And today it is called crossing the Rubicon. When anybody today, even in military, says we've crossed the Rubicon, that means we've gone to where there's no going back. There's no changing our minds now. And it's based on an event that took place on January the 10th, 49 BC. Okay? When Julius Caesar marched his Gallic army, his army of Gaul, massive army, about 10,000 soldiers, he took about half of them, 5,000, and he crossed the Rubicon. Now, no one had ever marched an army below or south of the Rubicon. Let me show you where it is. The Rubicon River is in the north of Italy. That's where Rome is located, the center knee of the boot. And the Rubicon is up there. When Caesar heard that they were trying to overthrow Rome, get rid of the Senate, kill everybody, turn it into a giant dictatorship, it infuriated him as a commanding general. So he took his entire army out of Gaul, France, marched them back into northern Italy, to the plains of northern Italy, and he camped at first on the north side of the Rubicon. Because no army had ever crossed south of the Rubicon, it would be seen as an act of war. But he did. When somebody rode out and said, don't do this or it'll be an act of war, he still crossed over and marched on Rome. And they warned him, this is not going to be received well in Rome. They're going to raise up an army against you. And this was his response in Latin. Alea in acta est. That was his curt response to him. Alea in acta est. That's Latin for this. The die is cast. There's no going back. We've crossed. We dare them to do anything. Raise one sword against us to see what happens. I mean, these were battle-hardened veterans that had just come out of Gaul, had just won something like 20 wars, 20 battles. Caesar's men were ready to do anything for him. And when he marched across, that's called crossing the Rubicon. It means I made a decision, there's no going back from. And so this is where that phrase comes from. Now is no time to show weakness. Listen, it's that way in the Bible. You've had times in your life where you made a decision and there's no going back from that decision. Okay? No going back. Like, for instance, when David hit Goliath right here. And Goliath's last words, you know what his last words were, right? Nothing like that ever entered my mind before. Okay, I'm kidding, he did say it. But all he really did was he did not kill Goliath. All he did was render him unconscious. What he was about to do was going to kill Goliath. He went and pulled out Goliath's own sword. Now, I get very graphic sometimes when I do this, and Karen always says, stop it. But big old sword like that, little old boy like that, Jewish boy, ruddy lad, big old sword, hard to lift up. I bet he didn't even get his head off in the first chop. I mean, he had to saw. Blood's flying. Oh, anyway, we'll stop, okay? But he got his head off. Listen, now is no time to show weakness. And David knew it. Just because I took this guy down don't mean it's over. But I'm about to make it over. I'm about to finish the job. No time to show weakness. Same thing was true with Micaiah. Micaiah was called in. King Ahab said, should we go up to Syria or should we forbear? And he said, go up, go up, go up. And he said, I told you not to lie to me. And he says, all right, well, if you do go up, let me tell you, I saw the children of Israel scattered like sheep on the hills without a shepherd. And he turned to Jehoshaphat and said, see, I told you that guy hates my guts. And so he said, put him back in jail. When I come back, I'll take care of you. And Micaiah, no time to show weakness. Micaiah said, if you come back at all, there is no God in Israel. No time to show weakness. Same thing was true of Queen Esther. When she revealed Haman at the sea. Here's a little teenage girl. She doesn't want to kill. She's never killed anybody in her life. It's always been nice upbringing. And now here she is. She's the queen. And Haman's a ruthless, evil man that wants to destroy every Jew. And so as soon as she reveals this wicked Haman wants to destroy me and my people, the king gets up furious, walks out in the garden. Haman comes over. You're not allowed to touch the queen. She goes over to her daybed. He comes over, gets on the bed, begging for his life. And so Queen Esther has to tell everyone, just leave him, leave him. And then in walks the king, and he sees that Xerxes sees that Haman's on the bed with his wife. He says, I'll give you the English vernacular. He says, are you going to rape my wife in my presence too? And they put a bag over his head. That's what you do before you hang somebody. And he was a dead man. Okay? Listen, Esther knew what she was doing when she got up and went over to her daybed. She knew what she was doing. No time to show weakness. No mercy to this guy, because he wanted to destroy them all. Same thing with Paul when he had to confront Peter in the city of Antioch. Peter coming up there, eating pork and peas and enjoying his good time with the Gentiles until certain from James came up from Jerusalem. Then he separated from them. I'm a good Jew. I don't eat with them Gentiles. And Paul said, I can't take this anymore. Do you realize by saying that, Peter, you are calling these Gentile Christians second-class Christians? That you're holier than better than they are. And Paul got right in his face. And Paul scolded him publicly. I mean, no time to show weakness. Because their God is no respecter of persons. And he needed to learn that lesson. And Paul got in his face to tell him. So, listen, how many of you have ever been to the Chicago airport? You ever landed in Chicago? Xavier's about to land there, amen? But how many of you have ever been to the Chicago airport? Okay, all right. If you do, you go to Seat Concourse. You'll find that airplane sitting in the corner of Seat Concourse. It's called a TBD from World War II, and it's got the number 15 on it. And it belonged to that guy right there. He was only a Lieutenant JG when the event happened, but he died in the war in 1944 as a lieutenant commander, Ed Butch O'Hare. O'Hare Airport's named after him. Now his father was the bookkeeper for Al Capone, but his father did not want him to follow in his footsteps. So his father did everything he could to keep him out of the mob, send him to Annapolis, and to get him a life and a career away from the mob. And so he ended up volunteering and he went out. Now what he was doing was he was on his way he was the wing commander, and he was on his way with his flight of TVDs on his way to attack a Japanese installation. And he noticed his fuel gauge was dropping rather rapidly. He asked his wingman if he'd go back and check and see if there's anything dripping off the airplane, and sure enough, he had a fuel leak. And it was just coming out. He could have burst into flames at any minute. So Lieutenant Commander O'Hare had to pull out, and he said, "You guys are going to have to go on without me, and I'm going back to the Lexington." He was stationed aboard the USS Lexington, and so as he was heading back, he got up high because he said, "If I run out of gas, I want to be able to glide." So he went way up high, and when he was up high, he looked down, and here's this huge V formation of Japanese bombers heading right toward his fleet, going to bomb the Lexington and all of his support group. And so he's on his way and even though he had a fuel leak, even though he only had 450 rounds of ammunition, he knew he could not outmaneuver or do anything with bombs, so he cut his bombs loose. All he had was 450 rounds, which is good for about maybe 10 3-second bursts. And he dove onto those bombers like a madman. He was outnumbered with Japanese escort planes and bombers. He was way outnumbered, but he dove in, he turned on his wing camera. And so his wing camera recorded everything that he did. He took out 2 bombers right at the start, and then he came up, did a turn, came back, and took out another one, and he attacked him like a mad dog. His attack was so ferocious that the Japanese assumed the attack was worthless, and they turned around, and several of the bombers turned back. One of them tried to crash into the Lexington and missed the Lexington because of the sailors on board. But listen, because of what he did, he received the Congressional Medal of Honor. Listen, no time to show weakness. I don't care if I'm running out of gas. I don't care what's going on. These guys are about to bomb my fleet into oblivion, and I'm not going to allow it. And so no time to show weakness. Joshua said, God told him, I'm going to magnify you today. I'm going to magnify you in the presence of the Lord. So what's the price of being magnified? You want God to magnify you? If you want God to magnify you, there's a price to be paid. Okay? There is a price to be paid. Okay, now let's just read this together, okay? As the word magnified implies, a leader's life and or actions are being scrutinized more than they would otherwise be. This means that the things they say, how they act, where they go, and even sometimes the lesser things, like what they like or dislike, or even what they eat, or they're being watched, they're being emulated, or they're being criticized. Okay? And being the case with all leaders, Joshua was no exception. He had the misfortune, okay, of being compared to all people, Moses. How would you like to fill those sandals? This is why God had to intervene in Joshua's behalf, so that the people of Israel would know that he alone is the chosen leader for the children of Israel today. And so God magnified him. Well, here are the top 5, and this isn't original with me, but here are the top 5 characteristics that are scrutinized in a leader. Anyone that's been in any position of leadership, man or woman, you're being scrutinized in these 5 areas, okay? Here are the top 5. Number 1 is confidence. Are you decisive as a leader? How confident are you that you can do this? Number 2 is capable. Are you capable? Do you have the skills to do this? Do you have the skill set to make these decisions, to design these plans, and so on? Number 3 is communicate. Do you communicate? Are you a good communicator? Can you communicate? And that doesn't mean you got to be a silver tongue. Moses wasn't a silver tongue, but he was a good communicator. He got his message across. And that's number 3. Number 4 is courageous. You have to be courageous. I mean, yesterday, even when the bullet creased his cheek, took off a piece of his ear, he's still standing there going like this. That's what I'm talking about. That's the characteristic that not a lot of people have. It's the truth. I mean, it is a rare quality that some people have and some don't. But is he courageous? And then number 5 is, are you caring and thoughtful? Do you care about your people? You have to show that you actually care about them. And so, very important. So they crossed over the Jordan to the plains of Gilgal, and so they're encamped, and I don't know how big the camp was, but I would say at least covered that much area. They probably posted soldiers. Just the first 3 tribes went across. The other 9 tribes helped before it was over, forming a complete, impenetrable perimeter that no Canaanite army dare attack. Okay? So they're alike but different. What do we mean alike but different? Look at verse 23. Okay, let me have a reader for verse 23. Okay? You're going to do it this time? Okay, Barb, you do verse 23. Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon my brain, okay?
For the Lord your God dried up the waters of Jordan from before you until you were passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which you dried up from before us until we were gone over.
Okay. And so they're alike but different. What do we mean? Well, we're talking about the crossing of the Red Sea and the Jordan River. They're alike but different. Both were water parting events. Both were miracles of God. No question about that. Both made the enemies of Israel fear. I mean, when the Egyptians saw that water stand like that, would you wanted to get the order to go into that? I wouldn't wanted to go into that. I mean, my attitude to Pharaoh would have been, you first. Okay? And so both made the Israel's enemies fear, and that's how they're alike. But they're also different. How are they different? Well, in just at least a couple different ways. In one certain key way, and that is this. This was not with them when the Red Sea parted. God did not give them the Ark of the Covenant until they got to Sinai, after they'd already crossed. They didn't have this. This is different. Now the Ark of the Covenant steps in the water first, and the waters part, because God now wants to shift attention to the fact that that thing, that Ark of the Covenant and mercy seat, is God. That is the power of God right there. And God wanted them to see that and to understand it. And so we don't know what the ark looks like. That's the one from Indiana Jones, okay? All right, so God intentionally wants the children of Israel to see the Ark of the Covenant as a symbol of his great power. And now here's a few quick lessons. And we've already read these verses, but pile of stones, and I don't think they piled them up like this, but be that as it may, they piled up the stones. So when the children ask, what do these stones mean? It's a matter of remembering, lest we forget. Why do we create memorials? Well, to honor heroism. To honor heroism. That's what that the Mount Suribachi Marine Corps memorial stands for at Arlington National Cemetery. Or we remember atrocities. That is the Holocaust memorial. It shows bodies crawling up onto the ground with an arm coming up out of the ground of the atrocities that Adolf Hitler committed against the Jews. And so with our memorials, we honor heroism and atrocities and leadership. We honor certain leaders because they've excelled in leadership, and disasters. That is Emperor Akihito and his wife Michiko, and they're standing at the great Japanese memorial to the tsunami that killed 20,000+ people just a while back. And so we know this, that as bad as Alzheimer's and dementia are, previously called senility, spiritual form of it is worse. The spiritual form of forgetting God is worse. I mean, we think about, do you know what Psalm 9:17 says? The wicked shall be turned into hell in every nation that forgets God. You can't forget what you didn't know. They once knew God and they turned away from God. And still the people, even of our own country, have not connected the dots yet. That the turning away from God, kicking him out of the classroom, kicking him out of the public square, is going to bring us to chaos. And they have not connected the dots. And then also in James it says, when you look into a mirror, the natural man beholdeth himself in a glass and goeth away and immediately forget what manner of man he was. God help us if we have spiritual Alzheimer's. We forget what kind of person we were. We forget what kind of God God is. And so, are you prepared? We have to learn to be prepared, just like when Israel sent soldiers across earth. It's the motto. If you're an Eagle Scout, this is the Eagle Scouts Award, and at the very top of the Eagle Scouts Award is be prepared. That ought to be what we do. When Ronald Reagan gave a speech back in 1981, he used this Latin phrase, "Si vis pacem para bellum." And it's Latin for to have peace, prepare for war. Nobody ever attacked a nation because they were too strong. Nations get attacked because they're weak. Because they're too weak. And so we are told to prepare now and we'll be ready for them. No one can think or prepare for everything. No one can. I don't care who they are. There's things that come in our life we can't prepare for. But we shouldn't just stumble around into the future like a blind man either. Okay? God gives us good heads. We have good wisdom. So use them. God gives us wisdom and tells us to use it. A good dose of common sense and insight never hurt anyone. Amen? Don't do this, okay? Common sense says, don't do this, okay? So, listen, that's what common sense is. We got to have that. Listen. And then our rising reputation. Listen, 4 elements go into your reputation, okay? They are your image, your trust, character, and leadership. Your image is public. People see you. Trust is that you are predictable. People know they can follow you. Your character is principled because you live by principles that you'll stand no matter what the consequences. I'm making this decision, and no matter where the chips fall, God will stand with me. That's a principled decision no matter what. And then it's pioneering. A leader is a pioneer. They're making decisions even though they're scary, and sometimes you just have to do it. One of my mentors in the ministry was Dr. Gene Woods. I love Brother Gene, and Brother Gene always said this: a dull axe will cut down a tree, but a sharp one will cut it down a lot faster. Now, I know that's probably not original with him. You can find somebody else 100 years ago that said it. But the guy I heard it from was Gene. And so I give it to him, okay? And I like that. Abraham Lincoln put it this way: if you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Because a sharper axe will get the job done faster, okay? And it just means that good preparation is the secret to success. John Wooden was the coach of UCLA for all those years, from 1948 to 75. And he died just 14 years ago. But he always told his players this: be more concerned with your character than your reputation. Your character is who you really are. Your reputation is merely what others think you are. And so be concerned with your character. Next week, we're going to deal with chapter number 5, and the title is Getting Clean for the Lord. Getting clean for the Lord. All right, let's be dismissed in a word of prayer. And Brother Stamper, will you close us in a word of prayer, sir?